They say a man's life can change in a heartbeat. Marcus Stone learned that truth in Fallujah 2007, when shrapnel meant for him tore through his brother's shoulder instead. He learned it again on a Friday afternoon in Phoenix, when he heard a little girl scream. The leather belt cracked against flesh. The sound cut through the August heat like a bullet through paper. Sharp, final, wrong. Marcus's hands shot up, signaling the 11 riders behind him to kill their engines. 12 Harley-Davidsons went silent in unison, a small army of chrome and leather, suddenly listening to something most men would pretend not to hear. 2 blocks away, maybe 3. The scream came again, higher this time, desperate in the way only a child's fear can be desperate. Marcus kicked his bike back to life, and the others followed. Instinct overriding thought. Brotherhood overriding caution. They'd been rolling through this quiet suburban neighborhood on their way to nowhere in particular. Just another Friday ride with brothers who'd bled together in deserts half a world away. Now they were hunting. The sound led them to Pinewood Drive, where houses squatted behind fences and sprinklers painted rainbows across manicured lawns. Normal. Safe. American. Except for the girl pressed against the metal barrier in the backyard of 2847, her back a canvas of fresh red welts layered over scars that had no business being on a 7-year-old's skin. The woman holding the belt froze mid-swing as 12 men materialized at her property line. Marcus saw her face shift through 3 expressions in the span of a breath. Surprise, rage, then that particular brand of arrogance that comes from people who've never been held accountable for anything. Her voice dripped contempt. This is private property. Get away from my fence before I call the police. Marcus gripped the metal with both hands, the barrier warm from the Arizona sun. The girl's eyes found his, dark brown, swimming with tears, but something else underneath. Recognition, maybe. Or hope. The words came out low, steady, a promise wrapped in threat. Hit her again. I dare you. The woman's perfectly manicured fingers tightened on the belt. Are you threatening me? Do you know who my husband was? He was a military hero. He left me to take care of his daughter, and I have every right to discipline her when she steals from me. Something cold settled in Marcus's chest, the same feeling he'd gotten on patrol when insurgents got too confident, talked too much before the ambush. Your husband. What was his name? She straightened, playing her trump card. Staff Sergeant Carlos Rivera. Maybe you've heard of him. The world tilted. Behind Marcus, someone, probably Jake, sucked in a breath. Every rider in the Iron Brotherhood MC knew that name. Carlos Rivera had saved Marcus's life more times than he could count in Iraq. And before his last deployment, before the training accident that killed him, Carlos had made Marcus promise one thing. Marcus's hand went to the leather wallet in his vest pocket, muscle memory from a conversation 2 years dead. The photograph inside showed 2 soldiers in desert combat gear, arms slung around each other's shoulders, grinning at the camera despite the heat in the mortars that had been falling an hour before. One was unmistakably Carlos Rivera, young, alive, believing he'd make it home. The other was Marcus, younger too, still naive enough to think promises were easy to keep. He held the photo up where the woman could see it. That was taken outside Fallujah, 2007. Carlos saved my life that day. Took shrapnel meant for me. So yeah, I know exactly who your husband was. The mask slipped from her face for just a moment, long enough for Marcus to see the calculation underneath. Then sirens cut through the afternoon quiet, 2 patrol cars screaming around the corner in response to the call Jake had made 30 seconds into this nightmare. The girl, Sophie, Carlos had named her Sophie, turned her head slightly, and Marcus felt the punch of recognition in his chest. He'd seen her once before, at Carlos's funeral, 5 years old and crying for her daddy while this woman yanked her away from anyone who tried to comfort her. Marcus had let it happen, had told himself the widow needed space, that grief made people act strange, that it wasn't his place to interfere. He'd broken his promise to Carlos that day, and Sophie had paid the price. Not anymore. But that was 72 hours ago, and the story, the real story, started earlier, in the ordinary moments before everything shattered. Tuesday afternoon, and Marcus stood on scaffolding 40 feet above Phoenix's streets, checking bolts for the 3rd time because in his world, good enough got people killed. The half-built commercial complex stretched around him, steel bones reaching for desert sky, every beam and joint a testament to careful hands and patient work. Below, the crew moved through their routines, the symphony of construction that had replaced the chaos of combat in Marcus's life. His phone buzzed for the third time in an hour. Unknown number. Marcus ignored it the way he'd been ignoring things for 2 years now. Ever since the army chaplain had shown up at his door with words about training accidents and mechanical failures and a brother who'd survived 3 tours in Iraq only to die on American soil. Jake Murphy appeared at the scaffold's edge, gray beard catching the afternoon light, 2 fingers missing from his left hand courtesy of an IED outside Ramadi. He carried 2 thermoses and that look he got when Marcus was being stubborn about something. Reaper, coffee's ready, site inspection in 10. Marcus pocketed his phone without checking the voicemail. That number keep calling you? Jake's silence was answer enough. He poured coffee into a battered metal cup, the kind the army issued, the kind most men threw at sea after discharge. This one had an inscription worn smooth by years of use. Carlos Rivera, Semper Fi. The cup had been a gift, passed from Carlos to Marcus on a night when mortars were falling and promises were made. Every morning for 15 years, Marcus had drunk from that cup. Every morning he remembered why he was still alive. Most mornings he felt grateful. Some mornings, usually around the anniversary of Carlos's death, the gratitude curdled into guilt. Jake waited until Marcus finished his coffee before speaking again. You gonna answer it? Not my problem. Carlos's kid ain't your problem? The world went very still. Marcus's hand stopped halfway to his mouth, coffee forgotten. What did you just say? Jake pulled out his own phone, showed Marcus the screen. Got curious after the second call. Ran the number. Arizona Child Protective Services, Phoenix office. Now, why would CPS be calling you about anything unless it's got to do with the only kid you got ties to? The scaffolding suddenly felt unstable beneath Marcus's feet, though he knew every bolt was tight, every weld was solid. His brain supplied the image he'd been avoiding. Sophie at Carlos's funeral, small and lost in a black dress, reaching for Marcus before her stepmother pulled her away. The promise he'd made to Carlos echoed in his head, the words he'd spoken in a forward operating base the night before Carlos's final deployment. If something happens to me, you check on my Sophie. Make sure she's okay. Not just once. Really check. Promise me, brother. Marcus had promised, and then he'd done nothing. His phone rang again. This time he answered. The woman's voice was professional, controlled, the kind of careful tone people use when delivering bad news. Mr. Stone, this is Karen Brooks from Arizona Child Protective Services. I understand you were listed as emergency contact on Staff Sergeant Carlos Rivera's service records. Marcus forced words through the tightness in his throat. Carlos died 2 years ago, training accident at Fort Benning. A pause, weighted with something Marcus couldn't quite read. Yes, sir, I'm aware. I'm calling because Sophie... Mr. Stone, when was the last time you checked on her? The question landed like incoming fire. Marcus closed his eyes, saw Carlos's face in the moment he'd made that promise, saw Sophie's small hand reaching for him at the funeral, saw the gap between intention and action stretching into years. I haven't. Carlos married Victoria 8 months before he died. I figured she was taking care of her. Karen Brooks let the silence stretch just long enough to make her point. Mr. Stone, can you come to our office? Today, if possible. There's something you need to see. 3 hours later, Marcus sat in a government office that smelled like burned coffee and desperation. Karen Brooks was older than her voice had suggested, with tired eyes that had seen too much, and a wedding ring she twisted whenever she looked at the file folder on her desk. The folder was labeled Rivera, Sophie in neat block letters, and it was thicker than any 7-year-old's file should be. She slid it across the desk without preamble. Mr. Stone, I need to show you something. It's not easy to look at. Marcus opened the folder. The first photograph showed a child's back, a geography of violence mapped in bruises and welts and scars that overlapped like sedimentary layers. The second showed ribs, the shadows of fractures barely healed. The third showed a face he'd last seen wet with tears at her father's funeral, now hollow-eyed and haunted. His hand started shaking. He closed the folder, but the images had already burned themselves into his brain. How long? Karen's voice softened, though the facts she delivered stayed brutal. We believe at least 18 months. Neighbors reported hearing screaming multiple times over the past year. Mrs. Chen next door called us twice. Both times, Victoria explained it as discipline for a difficult child. CPS did home visits. Victoria was convincing. She knew exactly what to say, how to explain the injuries. And Sophie had been coached. The words came out rough, scraped raw. Where is Sophie now? Emergency foster care. But Mr. Stone, Victoria has legal custody. Unless we can build a case for permanent removal, unless we can find suitable alternative placement, the system will likely return Sophie to her. Marcus was on his feet before he realized he'd stood. I'll take her. Karen studied him the way judges study defendants, weighing credibility against risk. Mr. Stone, it's not that simple. There's a process, background checks, home studies, foster care licensing. It can take months. Then start the process tonight. Whatever you need, I'll do it. She leaned back, still measuring. You understand this isn't temporary. You're taking on responsibility for raising a severely traumatized child. The therapy alone will be intensive. Nightmares, trust issues, behavioral challenges. This isn't a favor you do for a friend. This is the rest of your life. Marcus thought about Carlos diving across shrapnel meant for him. Thought about promises made in fire and blood. Thought about the distance between who he'd meant to be and who he'd actually been. I'm married, 22 years. My wife Sarah's a special education teacher. We have one daughter, Emma, 16 years old. I own Stone and Murphy Construction with Jake Murphy. He's my business partner, served with Carlos and me in Iraq. We've been running the company 15 years. I've got documentation. I've got Carlos's emails where he specifically asked me to watch out for Sophie if anything happened. I've got his service records listing me as emergency contact. The USB drive was in his pocket, always had been since he'd started carrying Carlos's letters around like a talisman against forgetting. He slid it across the desk. Karen plugged it in, her expression shifting as she scrolled through the files. This is substantial documentation, Mr. Stone. But Victoria is going to fight them. Her father's a prominent attorney, Harrison Blackwood. Old Phoenix money, 4 generations of influence. And legally you have no standing. You're not family, not a legal guardian. I've got brothers in arms who'll testify that Carlos and I were closer than blood. I've got a promise I'm going to keep, no matter what it takes. Something shifted in Karen's eyes. Recognition, maybe, or respect. She'd been doing this job long enough to know the difference between good intentions and genuine commitment. She leaned forward, voice dropping low enough that Marcus had to strain to hear. Victoria has Sophie this weekend. Supervised visits only, Friday through Sunday. CPS worker is supposed to be present, but we're understaffed, overworked. If Sophie comes back Monday with fresh injuries, if something happens, she let the implication hang. I need someone watching, someone who cares, someone who won't look away. Marcus understood what she was asking without her having to spell it out. You want me to surveil a child? I'm asking you to keep a promise to your brother. How you do that is up to you. The understanding passed between them unspoken. Marcus stood, pocketed the USB drive, and headed for the door. He stopped at the threshold, one hand on the frame. Carlos asked me for one thing. I failed. I'm not failing again. Karen's response followed him into the hallway. Then don't waste any more time. The Iron Brotherhood Clubhouse occupied an old warehouse on the industrial edge of Phoenix, far from the suburban neighborhoods where people complained about noise. Inside, the walls wore photographs like medals. Young men in desert camo, middle-aged men on motorcycles, old men in wheelchairs. Every photo told a story about brotherhood, about promises kept even after the shooting stopped. 12 writers sat around the scarred wooden table that had hosted 1,000 meetings. Jake at Marcus's right hand, Ghost at his left. Both of them silent in the way combat veterans learned to be silent. The others ranged in age from 40 to 65, united by shared scars and the code they'd lived by since boot camp. You don't abandon your brothers, dead or alive. Marcus spread the tactical map of Pinewood Drive across the table. Victoria Blackwood, 2847 Pinewood Drive. Sophie's there Friday through Sunday, supervised visits. CPS workers supposed to be present, but Karen thinks coverage might slip. Jake traced the street layout with his remaining fingers. Helen Street has good sight line to the backyard. Two-man rotating watch, 4-hour shifts. If we hear screaming, we call it in immediately. Ghost spoke for the first time all evening, his voice carrying the rasp of too many cigarettes and too much silence. What if we see abuse in progress? Marcus met each man's eyes in turn. Then you do what needs to be done. But brothers, we're not vigilantes. We're witnesses. We document, we report, we testify. We do this right by the book so Victoria can't wriggle out of it. Rage makes you stupid, gets people killed, so we do this smart. The vote was unanimous, the way it always was when one of their own needed help. Carlos had been Iron Brotherhood, even if he'd never worn the patch. That made Sophie family, and family didn't get left behind. That night, Marcus couldn't sleep. He stood at the window of his bedroom, watching the city lights blur into constellations, Sarah's breathing steady beside him. At 2:47 a.m., he gave up and retrieved the footlocker from the back of his closet. The combination lock opened to muscle memory. Carlos's birthday, the numbers worn smooth by repeated use. Inside, Marcus's dress uniform lay folded with parade ground precision, but he pushed past it to the letters underneath. Dozens of them, written on whatever paper Carlos could scavenge during deployments. Notebook pages, napkins, the back of supply requisitions. Marcus pulled one at random, recognizing Carlos's cramped handwriting immediately. Dear Reaper, Sophie turned 5 today. Wish I'd been there. Victoria threw her a party. She says it went well, but Sophie cried herself to sleep. Missing her daddy makes 2 of us missing home. If something happens to me on this next patrol, if I don't make it back, keep her safe. Promise me. You're the only one I trust with this. Carlos. The paper crinkled in Marcus's grip. He'd received that letter 3 weeks before the training accident. 3 weeks before Carlos died on American soil in what they'd called mechanical failure, what they'd called a tragic accident. 3 weeks before Marcus should have checked on Sophie and didn't. The last letter was dated 1 week before Carlos's death. Reaper, bad feeling about this training exercise. Can't explain it, just if something happens, don't let Victoria have Sophie. Find a way. You're the best man I know, the most loyal. Sophie needs someone who will protect her, not just provide for her. Promise me you'll find a way. Carlos. The handwriting in that final letter was shakier than usual, as if Carlos had written it in a hurry or under stress. Marcus traced the words with one finger, feeling the indentations where Carlos's pen had pressed hard into the paper. He'd broken that promise. Not anymore. Emma appeared in the doorway, 16 and fierce in her pajamas. Are we bringing her here, Sophie? Marcus nodded, not trusting his voice. His daughter's response was immediate. Good. I've been asking for a sister my whole life. Now I'll finally get one. Friday morning arrived wrapped in countdown. 58 hours until Victoria would have Sophie alone for the weekend. 58 hours to prepare for whatever came next. The house transformed. Sarah and Emma attacked the spare bedroom that had become a storage room over the years, hauling out boxes and painting the walls a soft lavender that Sophie might like. Marcus found himself shopping for things he hadn't bought in 16 years. Stuffed animals, books for 7-year-olds, art supplies because Sophie liked to draw, according to her file. The Brotherhood mobilized with military efficiency. Jake installed GoPro cameras on 12 helmets, testing angles and recording quality. Ghost ran surveillance equipment checks. The others mapped routes and timing, creating a rotation schedule that would keep eyes on Victoria's house around the clock. At 3:47 p.m., with 11 hours until Sophie arrived at Victoria's house, Marcus's phone rang. The voice on the other end was small, terrified, barely above a whisper. Is this Reaper? My daddy's friend? Marcus's heart stopped. Sophie? Daddy said if I was ever really scared, I should call you. He gave me your number, made me memorize it. I wrote it down in my shoe so I wouldn't forget. The background noise suggested a school, distant voices, lockers slamming, the particular acoustic of institutional hallways. Marcus forced himself to speak calmly despite the adrenaline flooding his system. Sophie, where are you? Are you safe right now? I'm at school, but Daddy... Her voice cracked, reformed. Victoria said I'm coming to her house this weekend, and I'm scared. She's been so angry lately. Keeps saying things about Daddy, about how he left her stuck with me. I don't want to go. A bell rang in the background, loud, final. Sophie's breathing quickened with panic. I have to go. Please don't let her hurt me again. Daddy said you'd keep me safe. He said... The line went dead. Marcus stared at his phone, Sophie's desperate plea echoing in his head. 58 hours had just become urgent. He hit Jake's number, not bothering with pleasantries when his brother answered. Move up the timeline. Sophie just called. She's terrified. I want eyes on that house now, and I want every rider ready to move the second we hear anything wrong. Jake's response was immediate. Already rolling. Ghost and I are 2 blocks from Pinewood Drive. We'll be in position by the time Victoria brings Sophie home from school. Marcus grabbed his keys, his vest, his helmet. Sarah appeared with a duffel bag already packed. Sophie's size clothes, basic toiletries, the stuffed animals they'd bought that morning. She'd known this might happen fast, had prepared for it with the same efficiency she brought to everything. Bring her home, Sarah said, and the words carried the weight of command. Marcus rode hard through Phoenix traffic, Jake's voice in his earpiece providing updates. Victoria just pulled up to the elementary school. Black Lexus, vanity plate. Sophie's coming out now, looks scared. Victoria's got her by the arm, tight grip. They're getting in the car. The next update came 3 minutes later. They're heading to Pinewood Drive, ETA 7 minutes. Marcus pushed his Harley faster, weaving through traffic with the precision of someone who'd done convoy escorts in Iraqi cities. The countdown in his head had shifted from hours to minutes. He reached Helen Street with 2 minutes to spare, pulling up beside Jake and Ghost's bikes. From this position, they had a clear view of Victoria's backyard through the barrier that separated one American dream from another. At 4:32 p.m., Victoria's Lexus pulled into her driveway. Sophie emerged slowly, shoulders hunched, carrying a backpack that seemed too heavy for her small frame. Victoria said something sharp. The words didn't carry, but the tone did. Sophie flinched. They disappeared into the house. Marcus, Jake, and Ghost settled in to watch, engines idling low, ready to move at the first sign of trouble. 15 minutes passed. The neighborhood went about its business, sprinklers running, dogs barking, a postal truck making its rounds. Normal, safe, American. The lie of suburbs. At 4:47 p.m., the back door opened. Victoria emerged first, then Sophie, moving with the slow resignation of someone who knew what was coming. Victoria carried something in her hand, leather folded in half, a belt. Sophie's shirt came off first. Even from a block away, Marcus could see the scars layering her back, a history written in violence. She pressed her hands against the metal barrier, small fingers gripping, and Marcus realized with sick certainty that this had happened before, many times, and no one had stopped it. The belt rose, fell. Sophie's scream cut through the afternoon quiet. Marcus was moving before conscious thought caught up, 11 other engines roaring to life behind him. The promise he'd made to Carlos, the promise he'd broken, the promise he'd keep now or die trying, all of it crystallized into this moment, this choice, this child screaming for help while adults looked away. Not anymore. Never again. 12 Harleys descended on Pinewood Drive like thunder, and Marcus Stone kept his word. 12 motorcycles surrounded Victoria's backyard in formation, riders dismounting with the coordinated precision of men who'd cleared hostile buildings together. Marcus reached the barrier first, both hands gripping the metal hard enough to leave indentations in his palms. The belt hung frozen in Victoria's hand, her face cycling through shock and calculation as she realized her private horror had just become public. Sophie remained pressed against the metal, small body trembling, back exposed to the August sun and a dozen witnesses. Marcus forced himself to look at every welt, every scar, cataloging the evidence even as rage threatened to override training. Combat had taught him that fury without discipline got people killed. He channeled it into cold focus instead. Jake was already on the phone, his voice steady as he fed information to the 911 dispatcher. Ghost had his GoPro recording, the camera lens capturing angles that would hold up in court. The other riders positioned themselves along the property line, forming a human barrier between Victoria and any escape route. Victoria found her voice, pitching it toward righteous indignation. "You're trespassing. I'm calling the police." Marcus's response came out quiet, the dangerous kind of quiet that made smarter people back down. "Go ahead, we'll wait." She tried a different tactic, addressing the growing crowd of neighbors drawn by the commotion. "This is a misunderstanding. My stepdaughter has behavioral issues. She's been stealing, lying. I was simply disciplining her." The elderly woman from next door, Mrs. Chen, according to the CPS file, emerged from her house with a phone and shaking hands. Her voice carried across the street, cracking with what might have been guilt or grief. "I should have called sooner. God forgive me, I should have called months ago." Sirens approached, growing louder. Marcus kept his eyes on Sophie, who'd turned slightly to look at them. Recognition flickered across her tear-stained face, fighting with disbelief. He'd promised her father. She'd been told about that promise. Now here he was, present when it counted most. The words came without planning, rough but honest. "Sophie, I'm Marcus Stone. Your dad and I served together in Iraq. He made me promise to keep you safe. I'm here now. Do you understand? You're not going back inside that house." Victoria lunged toward the barrier, belt still gripped in her fist, but Jake was already moving to intercept. The big man positioned himself between her and Sophie with the calm efficiency of someone who'd done close protection work in actual war zones. Victoria pulled up short, finally understanding that these weren't weekend riders she could intimidate with lawyers and money. Two patrol cars screeched to a halt in front of the house. Officer Torres emerged from the first vehicle, hand near her weapon, taking in the scene with practiced assessment. 12 bikers, one woman with a belt, one child with visible injuries. Her expression went flat, the cop mask dropping into place over whatever personal reaction she was having. She addressed Marcus first, maybe because he was closest, or maybe because she read him as the leader. "Sir, step back from the fence. All of you, back away now." Marcus complied, hands visible, movement slow and non-threatening. The other riders followed his lead, creating space but not leaving. They'd be witnesses whether Victoria liked it or not. Torres approached Sophie carefully, voice softening. "Sweetheart, I'm Officer Torres. Can you turn around for me?" Sophie turned and Torres' professional mask cracked just slightly. Even from a distance, Marcus could see her jaw clench, could recognize the effort it took to keep her voice steady. She keyed her righty without taking her eyes off Sophie's injuries. "This is Unit 47. I need Child Protective Services to 2847 Pinewood Drive immediately. I need an ambulance, non-emergency, but priority, and I need a detective from the Child Abuse Unit." Victoria's lawyer voice kicked in, smooth and practiced. "Officer, these men trespassed on my property. They're harassing me. My stepdaughter has oppositional defiant disorder. The injuries are from rough play. She's a clumsy child." Torres turned slowly, and something in her movement made Victoria step back. "Ma'am, turn around and place your hands behind your back." The mask shattered completely. "You can't arrest me for disciplining my own child." Torres's voice went arctic. "I'm arresting you for aggravated child abuse. You have the right to remain silent." The Miranda warning continued over Victoria's protests. A second officer approached Marcus, notepad out, questions ready. Marcus gave his statement in the clipped, factual tone of someone who'd done after-action reports in combat zones. Time, location, what he'd witnessed, what he'd heard. The other riders did the same, 12 sworn statements that would form an unbreakable chain of evidence. The ambulance arrived as Torres finished processing Victoria's arrest. The paramedics approached Sophie with careful gentleness, explaining every movement before they made it. She flinched anyway, conditioned by trauma to expect adults to hurt her. Marcus watched, feeling the weight of his failure press down on his shoulders. If he'd checked on her after Carlos's funeral, if he'd called even once, if he'd paid attention to the warnings buried in Carlos's letters. One of the paramedics approached Marcus. "Sir, are you family?" Marcus opened his mouth to explain the complicated truth, but Officer Torres intervened. "He's the one who called it in. Stone, you'll need to give a full statement downtown. Bring your footage too." Jake held up his phone, 12 helmet cameras synced to a single file. Already compiled, ready to transfer whenever you need it. Torres took the phone, watched 30 seconds of footage, and her expression hardened further. She handed it back. Email that to this address. And gentlemen, thank you. You probably saved this kid's life today. The ambulance doors closed on Sophie, who looked back at Marcus with something between hope and terror. He made the only promise he knew how to make, the one he should have kept years ago. His voice carried across the street, steady and sure. Sophie, I'm following right behind you. I'm not leaving. She nodded, so small in the ambulance and so alone. Then the doors blocked his view, and the vehicle pulled away, lights flashing but no siren, transporting one more broken child to people who'd try to put her back together. The ride to St. Joseph's Hospital took 15 minutes through Phoenix traffic. Marcus led the convoy, 4 bikes peeling off to handle police statements while 8 stayed with him. Brothers who'd seen enough abandoned children in Iraqi cities to know that follow-through mattered, that promises kept or broken defined who a man actually was under all the uniforms and bravado. The emergency room receptionist looked up at 8 large men in motorcycle vests and reached for her phone, probably to call security. Marcus beat her to it, keeping his voice level and non-threatening. We're here for Sophie Rivera. We're the ones who stopped the abuse. Police know we're here. She studied him, weighing risk against protocol, then made a call. 5 minutes later, Officer Torres arrived, verified their presence, and the tension in the ER dropped from critical to merely watchful. Marcus claimed a plastic chair in the waiting area and prepared to do what soldiers did between firefights: wait and remember, and fight the guilt that always came in quiet moments. Jake settled into the chair beside him, wrench and hammer taking up positions nearby. The others dispersed through the waiting room, a protective perimeter around their brother who was fighting battles that had nothing to do with bullets. Wrench broke the silence first, his prosthetic legs stretched out in front of him. You did right, Reaper. Carlos would be proud. Marcus stared at his hands, still seeing the impression the metal barrier had left on his palms. Should have done it sooner. Hammer rolled his wheelchair closer, his own war wounds visible in the way he carried himself. Shoulda, woulda, coulda don't mean shit. You were there when it counted. That little girl saw someone give it a damn. That's what matters. The argument was familiar, the same one they'd had after various failures in Iraq when patrols went wrong, or intelligence proved faulty, or good men died despite everyone's best efforts. Combat veterans learned to live with the gap between what should have been and what actually was, but learning to live with it didn't make it hurt less. Marcus pulled out his phone, found the photo of Carlos he kept there. Carlos grinned at the camera, young and alive, believing he had a future. Behind him, smoke rose from a building they'd just cleared, but Carlos's expression showed only relief at another day survived, another step closer to home. The memory arrived unbidden, a different night in a different fob, closer to Carlos's final deployment. They'd been sitting on sandbags, stars impossibly bright away from city lights. Carlos had been quieter than usual, cleaning his weapon with extra care, the kind of focus that meant something was bothering him. Marcus had finally asked, "You good, brother?" A long pause, the desert wind filling the silence. Then Carlos had set down his rifle and turned to face Marcus directly. "I'm worried about Sophie, about leaving her with Victoria. I keep telling myself I'm overthinking it, that I'm being paranoid. But Reaper, sometimes Victoria looks at Sophie like she's an obstacle instead of a kid. And Sophie started having nightmares. Won't talk about them. Just wakes up crying." Marcus had felt the first stirring of concern, the instinct that had kept him alive through multiple deployments. "You think Victoria's hurting her?" Carlos had shaken his head, but the gesture hadn't been convincing. "I don't know. Maybe. Or maybe Sophie's just stressed about me deploying again. Kids pick up on tension. But if something happens to me, if I don't come back, I need to know someone's watching out for her. Someone who will actually pay attention, not just assume everything's fine." That's when Carlos had pulled out a piece of paper, creased from being folded and refolded, and handed it to Marcus. Sophie's name and birthday, Victoria's address, phone numbers, everything Marcus would need to find them. At the bottom, in Carlos's careful handwriting, "Promise me, CR." Marcus had taken the paper, tucked it into his wallet behind the photo. "I promise, brother, if anything happens, I'll check on Sophie. I'll make sure she's okay. Carlos had gripped Marcus's shoulder, the warrior's grip that meant more than words. That's all I needed to hear. Love you, brother. Those were the last meaningful words they'd exchanged. 3 weeks later, Carlos was dead, and Marcus had kept that piece of paper in his wallet, had looked at it every time he pulled out his license, and had done nothing. The paper was still there now, worn soft at the creases, Carlos's handwriting fading but still legible. Promise me. Jake's voice pulled Marcus back to the present. You're thinking about him. Not a question. Jake had been there for enough of Marcus's memories to recognize a look. Thinking about how many times he asked me, how many chances I had to keep my word. Jake's response was immediate and firm. You kept your word when it mattered. That little girl's in a hospital bed right now instead of a morgue because you heard her scream and you stopped. That's keeping your word, Reaper. That's what Carlos needed you to do. Before Marcus could respond, Karen Brooks appeared, moving through the ER with the exhausted determination of someone who'd been fighting lost causes for too long. She spotted Marcus immediately, her expression shifting through relief and concern as she approached. Her voice was professional, but softer than it had been in her office. Mr. Stone, Sophie's asking for you. Marcus stood so fast he almost knocked his chair over. She's awake? She's talking? Karen nodded, already walking toward the private rooms. Doctors have examined her, documented her injuries. 2 partially healed rib fractures, approximately 6 weeks old, extensive bruising and lacerations, evidence of repeated trauma over at least 18 months. She's severely malnourished, weighs 42 pounds when she should be closer to 55. Each fact landed like a gut punch. Marcus forced himself to keep walking, to not think about what 18 months of abuse looked like on a 7-year-old's body. Karen stopped at a door, hand on the handle, turning to face Marcus with an expression he couldn't quite read. 5 minutes, supervised. You don't touch her unless she initiates contact. And Mr. Stone? She asked for you specifically. Used your road name. Is Reaper here? Daddy said Reaper would come. The words threatened to break something in Marcus's chest. He nodded, not trusting his voice, and followed Karen into the room. Sophie sat propped against pillows, wearing a hospital gown covered in cartoon bears, her arm bandaged, her face cleaned of tears, but still blotchy and swollen. When Marcus appeared in the doorway, her eyes went wide with an expression that might have been hope, or might have been disbelief that he'd actually followed through. He stayed by the door, remembering Karen's instructions, giving Sophie space to adjust to his presence. Hi, Sophie. Remember me? She nodded, small and certain. Her voice came out hoarse, probably from screaming. You're Reaper. My daddy's friend. You came when I called. The reference confused him for a moment before he remembered. She'd called his phone from school, had reached out for help before the weekend even started. Sophie had trusted the promise Carlos made about Marcus, had believed it enough to memorize a phone number and hide it in her shoe. Marcus moved slowly to the chair beside her bed, keeping his movements predictable, non-threatening. Your dad talked about you every single day we served together. Every single day. He loved you more than anything in the world. Sophie's lower lip trembled. Victoria said Daddy didn't really love me. She said he left because I was too much trouble. The casual cruelty of it hit Marcus like incoming fire. He thought about Carlos, showing him photos of Sophie's first day of kindergarten. Carlos calling from base phones just to hear her voice. Carlos turning down promotion opportunities that would have meant more time away from home. Marcus kept his voice gentle but firm. Sophie, your dad loved you more than his own life. He took shrapnel meant for me because he wanted to make sure he got home to you. Victoria lied. About everything. A single tear tracked down Sophie's cheek. She scrubbed it away with the back of her hand, the gesture defiant despite her size. Are you really going to take care of me, or is that a lie too? The question was fair, brutal in its honesty. Marcus had failed her. Why should she trust him now? He pulled out his wallet, extracted the piece of paper Carlos had given him that night in Iraq, unfolded it carefully despite its fragility. Your dad gave me this before his last deployment. Your name, your birthday, everything I'd need to find you. He made me promise to watch out for you if anything happened to him. I kept this paper in my wallet every day, and I didn't keep my promise. I failed you and I failed him. Sophie watched him with eyes too old for seven, eyes that had learned to evaluate adult sincerity against adult betrayal. Marcus leaned forward, making sure she could see his face clearly. I can't undo that failure. I can't take back the time I should have been checking on you. But Sophie, I'm keeping my promise now. Starting right now, today, you are not going back to Victoria, ever. Do you understand? I'm going to become your legal guardian, and you're going to come live with me and my wife and my daughter. You're going to have a real home. Her voice was so small it almost disappeared. What if the judge says no? What if I have to go back? Marcus thought about Harrison Blackwood's money and influence, about Victoria's lawyers and the system that had failed Sophie repeatedly already. He thought about all the ways this could go wrong, all the obstacles between this moment and actual safety. Then he thought about Carlos diving across shrapnel, about promises made in fire, about the kind of man he'd tried to become after seeing what war did to innocent people. Then I'll fight harder. And if the judge still says no, I'll appeal. And if that doesn't work, I'll find another way. Sophie, your dad saved my life more times than I can count. I owe him everything. And I owe you safety and love and a childhood that doesn't involve being terrified every day. That's not something I'm going to fail at anymore. Sophie studied his face for a long moment, weighing promises against reality, hope against experience. Then she did something that broke and rebuilt Marcus's heart simultaneously. She reached out one small hand, and when he took it gently, mindful of her bruises, she held on tight. Okay, she whispered. I believe you. Karen cleared her throat from the doorway, a warning that time was up. Marcus squeezed Sophie's hand once, gently, then stood. I'll be right outside, and tomorrow morning I'm starting all the paperwork to become your guardian. You're safe now, kiddo, I promise. As he left the room, Sophie called after him. Wait, what do I call you, whoa? Marcus turned back, saw her sitting up straighter, despite the pain it must have caused. My road name is Reaper, but you can call me whatever feels right. Her response came immediately. Did my daddy call you Reaper? Sometimes. Sometimes he called me Marcus. Sometimes he called me that stubborn son of a gun who won't follow orders. Sophie's mouth quirked in what might become a smile someday. I'll call you Uncle Reaper. Is that okay? Marcus's throat went tight. That's more than okay, Sophie. That's perfect. Outside the hospital room, Marcus leaned against the wall and let himself feel the full weight of the last 3 hours. Karen approached with a tablet, already pulling up forms and procedures, the machinery of child protection grinding into motion. Mr. Stone, I'm expediting your background check. If it comes back clean, and I expect it will, I can place Sophie with you on a temporary emergency basis within 48 hours, pending a formal custody hearing. Marcus straightened. What are Victoria's chances of getting Sophie back? Karen's expression went carefully neutral, the look of someone who'd seen too many cases go wrong. With the evidence we have, minimal. But Victoria's father is Harrison Blackwood. He's got 4 generations of Phoenix influence and the money to hire the best defense attorneys in the state. He's already called my supervisor twice, demanding Sophie be returned to Victoria immediately, claiming false allegations orchestrated by bitter military friends who never accepted her. The politics of it turned Marcus's stomach. So we need more than eyewitness testimony and medical evidence. We need everything, every email Carlos sent you, every service record, every witness who can testify to your relationship with him and his concerns about Victoria. We need to prove you're not just a friend, you're the guardian Carlos explicitly wanted for Sophie. Marcus pulled out his phone, began forwarding files to Karen's email address. Carlos's service records listing Marcus as emergency contact, character letters written before deployments, email threads discussing concerns about Victoria, text messages from the week before Carlos died, increasingly worried, increasingly certain something was wrong. Karen's tablet dinged repeatedly as the files arrived. She scrolled through them, her expression shifting from professional interest to something sharper. Mr. Stone, this is substantial documentation. Carlos was clearly preparing for the possibility that something might happen to him. These emails specifically mention his concerns about Victoria's treatment of Sophie. A new voice interrupted from behind them, professional and measured. That's because Carlos Rivera knew his wife was planning to kill him. Marcus turned to find a woman in her 40s, Asian features, tired eyes, detective's shield clipped to her belt. She extended a hand. Detective Rachel Chen, Child Abuse Unit. I've been investigating Victoria Blackwood for 3 months. Mr. Stone, I think you and I need to talk. They relocated to a small conference room on the hospital's administrative floor. Marcus and Detective Chen facing each other across a table, scarred by countless difficult conversations. Jake had followed, standing by the door, silent witness to whatever was about to unfold. Chen opened a thick file folder. Robert Chen was my uncle. Married Victoria Blackwood in 2012. Died in a car accident 6 months later. She was driving, no charges filed. The personal connection explained the intensity in Chen's expression. Marcus leaned forward, attention sharpening. You think Victoria killed him? I know she did. Took me 3 years and a transfer to Phoenix PD to get access to the case files, but I found inconsistencies. The accident investigation was sloppy, witnesses weren't properly interviewed, and Victoria collected $500,000 in life insurance within 2 weeks. Chen pulled out crime scene photos, accident reports, insurance documents. Robert had a daughter from his first marriage, Emma Chen, my cousin. She lived with Victoria for 4 months after Robert died. Then Emma's biological mother filed for emergency custody, claiming abuse. Emma had bruises, burns, signs of systematic torture. Victoria claimed Emma was a troubled child acting out, and the family court judge believed her. But Emma got out. The pattern was emerging, clear and horrible. Marcus's hands clenched into fists. How many times? Chen pulled out another file. James Porter, 2015, married Victoria 8 months before he died of a sudden heart attack. 35 years old, perfect health, no family history of cardiac issues. Victoria was alone with him when it happened. She collected $400,000. Porter had a son, Justin, who was removed by CPS after 6 months for suspected abuse, returned to his grandmother. A third file. Michael Barnes, 2019, car accident. Victoria walked away without a scratch. Barnes was military, like Robert Chen and your friend Carlos. Life insurance paid out $350,000. No children involved in that marriage. Chen spread the files across the table, a timeline of death and profit. And then Carlos Rivera, training accident at Fort Benning, mechanical failure, Humvee rollover. Victoria collected $400,000 plus Carlos's house, his possessions, in custody of Sophie. Marcus forced words through the rage building in his chest. You're saying Victoria's a serial killer who targets military men. Chen's response was flat, factual. I'm saying Victoria Blackwood has been married 3 times to military personnel. All 3 husbands died within 2 years of marriage under suspicious circumstances. She collected over $1 million in life insurance, and every single marriage involved abusive stepchildren. She pulled out one more file, this one marked with federal agency logos. FBI's involved now. They've been tracking a pattern of military widows who remarry quickly, whose husbands die young, who receive substantial insurance payouts. Victoria Blackwood is connected to at least 14 women across 6 states. They found each other online, in support groups for military widows. They share techniques. The word techniques hung in the air, clinical and obscene. Marcus thought about Carlos in that Humvee, thought about how many times his brother had checked his vehicle before every mission, how paranoid combat veterans were about mechanical failures. Carlos's death wasn't an accident. Chen pulled out Army CID reports, maintenance logs, photographs of the Humvee's wreckage. The steering column showed signs of tampering, scored marks consistent with a saw blade, weakening the metal so it would fail under stress. The investigation was closed as accidental, but Army CID reopened it last month based on new evidence. We have credit card records placing Victoria in Georgia the day before Carlos's training exercise. We have hardware store receipts for tools matching the damage pattern. And we have a mechanic who remembers seeing a woman matching Victoria's description in the motor pool the night before the accident. Marcus couldn't breathe. Carlos hadn't died in a tragic accident. He'd been murdered systematically by the woman he'd married to give his daughter a mother. And Sophie had been left in the care of her father's killer while Marcus did nothing. Chen wasn't finished. There's more. Victoria has a college roommate, Linda Crawford, currently in Texas. Linda's also a military widow, also remarried quickly, also had suspicious circumstances around her husband's death. Her stepdaughter, Emma Rodriguez, is 19 now and willing to testify. She says Linda and Victoria had what they called a system, ways to discipline stepchildren that wouldn't leave obvious marks, ways to explain injuries to social workers, ways to make deaths look accidental. The scope of it was staggering. Not one predator, but a network, comparing notes, refining techniques, hunting military families with the same cold calculation that insurgents had used to place IEDs. Chen must have read his expression. FBI's identified 17 children who were abused by women in this network. All of them are being removed from their homes as we speak. Federal warrants are being executed across 6 states. And Mr. Stone, if you hadn't heard Sophie scream, if you hadn't stopped Victoria when you did, Sophie would be number 18. Except she wouldn't have survived to be rescued. Victoria's internet search history from 2 days ago shows queries for how long does it take a child to drown and accidental drowning statistics. The words landed like mortar fire. Victoria had been planning to murder Sophie, had been researching methods, had been preparing to eliminate the last witness to what she'd done to Carlos. Jake's voice came from the doorway, rough with barely controlled rage. "What do you need from us?" Chen's response was immediate. "Everything. Testimony about Carlos's relationship with Victoria, about his concerns, about his wishes for Sophie's care. Helmet camera footage from today, all of it. Witness statements from every rider who was present. And Mr. Stone, I need you to know that this isn't just a custody case anymore. This is a federal investigation into a murder conspiracy. When this goes to trial, you're going to be a key witness in taking down an entire network of killers." Marcus thought about Carlos, about Sophie, about 17 other children suffering while adults looked away. He thought about promises made and broken and the chance to keep one that mattered. "Whatever you need, all of it. When do we start?" Chen smiled grimly. "We already have. FBI's at Victoria's house right now, executing a search warrant. They're pulling computer records, financial documents, correspondence with Linda Crawford and the others. Victoria's under arrest, bail set at $1 million. Her father will post it within the hour, but it doesn't matter. The evidence is overwhelming." She gathered her files, preparing to leave, then paused. "Mr. Stone, Carlos Rivera didn't just ask you to watch out for Sophie. He was warning you about Victoria. Those emails you sent Karen, we've reviewed them. Carlos knew something was wrong. He might not have known she was planning to kill him, but he knew she was dangerous. And he trusted you to protect his daughter when he couldn't. You kept that promise today. You saved her life." After Chen left, Marcus sat in the conference room with Jake, both of them processing the magnitude of what they'd just learned. Carlos murdered. Sophie targeted for elimination. A network of killers operating for years while the system failed to connect the dots. Jake broke the silence. "We tell the others?" Marcus nodded. "Tonight, emergency meeting at the clubhouse. The Brotherhood needs to know what we're up against." His phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. "Heard the news. Spare room's ready. Bring our girl home." Our girl, as if Sophie had already been absorbed into the family, as if the adoption was a foregone conclusion rather than a legal battle that might take months. Sarah's certainty steadied something in Marcus, reminded him that he wasn't fighting alone. He replied, "Tomorrow, after custody hearing." And Sarah, "Carlos was murdered." The 3 dots indicating Vera was typing appeared, then disappeared, then appeared again. Finally, we say, "Then we make sure his daughter is safe. Whatever it takes." Whatever it takes. The same words Marcus had used with Carlos in a dozen firefights. The same promise that had kept them both alive through 3 deployments. Now he'd use those words to honor his brother's memory, to keep the one promise that mattered more than all the others combined. Marcus stood, Jake rising with him, and they walked back to the waiting room where 6 other riders still maintained their vigil. Brothers who'd shown up without question, who'd witnessed abuse and reported it properly, who documented everything so thoroughly that Victoria's expensive lawyers would have nothing to work with. Wrench looked up as they approached. "What's the word, Reaper?" Marcus surveyed his brothers, men who'd fought beside him, who understood that promises weren't negotiable, who'd dropped everything to save a child they'd never met because she was Carlos's daughter, and that made her family. Carlos was murdered. Victoria killed him, probably killed two husbands before him. There's a whole network of these women, 14 of them, 17 kids being abused. FBI's taking them down as we speak, and we're going to testify against all of them. Silence greeted the announcement, heavy with the weight of men who'd seen evil before, but had hoped to leave it behind in foreign deserts. Then Hammer's voice, steady despite the wheelchair and the scars and the years that separated him from the warrior he'd once been. Then we testify, for Carlos, for Sophie, for all those kids who didn't have anyone watching their backs. The others echoed the sentiment, a chorus of commitment that reminded Marcus why he trusted these men with his life, why brotherhood meant more than blood. Tomorrow there would be custody hearings and legal battles and testimony that would help dismantle a network of killers. Tomorrow Victoria's father would bring his money and influence to bear, trying to protect his daughter from consequences. But tonight Marcus sat vigil in a hospital waiting room, keeping a promise to a brother who died trusting that someone would catch the people he loved when they fell. Tonight, he had finally kept his word, and tomorrow he'd keep it again, and every day after that for as long as Sophie needed him. Monday morning arrived with the weight of consequences. Marcus stood outside the Maricopa County Family Court building, watching dawn break over Phoenix, while behind him, 43 motorcycles lined the street in silent formation. The riders wore their cleanest clothes, pressed shirts, polished boots, leather vests scrubbed of road dust. They'd agreed on no patches, nothing that could be twisted into gang affiliation, just veterans showing up for a fallen brother's child. Harrison Blackwood's black Mercedes pulled into the courthouse parking lot at 8:45, followed by two more vehicles carrying lawyers in suits that probably cost more than Marcus's truck. The old man emerged with the bearing of someone who'd never lost anything important, never been told no by people who mattered. Silver hair perfectly styled, cufflinks catching the morning sun, every inch the patriarch who'd built his family's name over 4 generations of Arizona law. He spotted Marcus, changed direction deliberately, crossing the parking lot with purposeful strides. The lawyers trailed behind, already reaching for phones and briefcases, preparing for whatever confrontation their client was engineering. Harrison stopped 3 feet away, close enough to make his point, far enough to maintain plausible deniability. "Mr. Stone, I wanted to speak with you before we waste the court's time." Marcus kept his hands visible, his posture relaxed, giving Harrison nothing to use against him later. "I've got nothing to say to you." The old man's smile never reached his eyes. "Then listen, my daughter made mistakes. I acknowledge that. Parenting is difficult, especially for a widow trying to manage a troubled child alone. But she's family, and my family doesn't lose. I've filed emergency motions challenging yesterday's ruling. I have witnesses who'll testify Victoria is an exemplary stepmother. I have child psychologists who'll explain Sophie's behavioral disorders. I have judges who owe me favors going back decades." He leaned in, voice dropping to a register meant only for Marcus. "You're a construction worker, a biker, a veteran with documented PTSD. No legal training, no political connections, no generational wealth. You think you can win against my resources? My family built this city. My family's name is on hospitals and libraries. And you're what? A man who rides motorcycles with other damaged veterans?" Jake had moved closer during the speech, Ghost flanking the other side, both men ready to intervene if Harrison got physical. Marcus felt their presence like armor, the same way he'd felt it in Iraqi streets when insurgents tested their resolve. His response came out quiet, the kind of quiet that preceded violence in places Harrison Blackwood had never been. "I'm a man who keeps his promises. Your daughter murdered my brother. She tortured his child. And I don't care how much money you have or how many judges you own, Sophie's never going back to her." Harrison's mask slipped for just a moment, revealing something cold and calculating underneath the patrician concern. "See you in court, Mr. Stone. Enjoy these last hours with Sophie. They'll be your only ones." He walked away, lawyers following, leaving Marcus standing in the parking lot with fury and determination warring in his chest. Jake's hand landed on his shoulder, grounding. "We knew it'd be ugly." Marcus watched Harrison disappear into the courthouse. "Doesn't matter how ugly it gets, we're not backing down." Inside, the courtroom was already filling, Reporters in the gallery, CPS workers with files, Detective Chen conferring with prosecutors. Judge Patterson took the bench at 9 sharp, same stern expression he'd worn during the emergency hearing, same impression of a man who'd seen too many cases and trusted too few people. Victoria entered in handcuffs, ankle monitor visible under conservative clothing, chosen to project wounded innocence. She'd aged in the 72 hours since her arrest, or maybe Marcus was just seeing her clearly for the first time, the predator beneath the suburban camouflage. Harrison's lead attorney stood, a woman named Margaret Thorne who'd built a reputation destroying witnesses and manufacturing reasonable doubt. Her voice carried the polished confidence of someone who'd never lost a case she cared about winning. Your Honor, my client has been the victim of a coordinated smear campaign. Marcus Stone and his motorcycle club are bitter friends of Carlos Rivera, who never accepted Victoria as his wife. The so-called abuse is discipline, appropriate correction of a child with documented behavioral issues. The injuries are consistent with rough play and childhood clumsiness. We have expert witnesses prepared to testify. Judge Patterson held up one hand. Ms. Thorne, I've reviewed the medical evidence. I've watched the helmet camera footage. I've read Detective Chen's reports. Before you waste more of the court's time with character assassination, perhaps you'd like to address the fact that your client is under federal investigation for conspiracy to commit murder. The courtroom went silent. Margaret Thorne recovered quickly, years of courtroom experience smoothing over the surprise. Your Honor, those allegations are baseless. The FBI investigation is ongoing. No charges have been filed, and speculation about unproven crimes has no bearing on this custody matter. Detective Chen rose from the prosecution table, file folder in hand. Your Honor, if I may, the FBI investigation is no longer ongoing. Federal warrants were executed this morning across 6 states. 14 women have been arrested in connection with a conspiracy to murder military personnel for insurance money and systematically abuse their stepchildren. Victoria Blackwood is named in the federal indictment handed down 1 hour ago. She approached the bench, handed the judge documents still warm from the printer. Patterson read in silence, his expression darkening with each page. Margaret Thorne tried again, voice sharp with desperation, masquerading as indignation. Your Honor, this is highly irregular. Federal charges are separate from family court proceedings. The question before this court is simple. What placement best serves Sophie Rivera's interest? Victoria Blackwood is her legal guardian, appointed by her father before his death. Patterson looked up from the documents, and something in his expression made even Margaret Thorne stop talking. Ms. Thorne, according to this indictment, your client is charged with 4 counts of first-degree murder, including the murder of Carlos Rivera through deliberate sabotage of his military vehicle. She's also charged with conspiracy, fraud, and 8 counts of aggravated child abuse. The FBI has testimony from 12 other victims, financial records showing insurance fraud, and computer evidence of your client coordinating with other conspirators to share techniques for abuse and murder. He set the documents down, folded his hands, and fixed Margaret Thorne with a look that could have frozen lava. Now, knowing all that, do you still want to argue that returning Sophie to your client's custody serves anyone's interests except your client's? The silence stretched. Margaret Thorne looked at Harrison, who'd gone pale, then at Victoria, who was staring at the table with an expression that might have been shock or might have been the realization that her carefully constructed world was finally collapsing. Judge Patterson turned to Marcus. Mr. Stone, approach. Marcus stood, Jake rising with him, both men moving to stand before the bench. The judge studied them with the assessing gaze of someone who'd spent 40 years reading people. Mr. Stone, I've reviewed your background. Marines, 3 tours Iraq, honorable discharge. Own your own business, married 22 years, 1 daughter, no criminal record. Carlos Rivera listed you as emergency contact on every deployment. He wrote character letters specifically requesting you as Sophie's guardian if anything happened to him. Patterson picked up another document. You heard a child screaming and you stopped. You documented evidence properly, called authorities immediately, and you've been working within the system since. You've done everything right. He paused, letting the weight of the moment settle. But I need to hear from you directly. Are you prepared to take permanent custody of Sophie Rivera, to raise her as your own daughter, to provide for her material and emotional needs, to shepherd her through years of therapy and recovery? This isn't temporary. This is forever. Marcus thought about Carlos in the desert, grinning despite the heat. Thought about Sophie pressed against a barrier, small and terrified, but still hoping someone would care. Thought about promises made in fire. His voice came out steady, sure. Yes, Your Honor. Carlos Rivera asked me for one thing. Watch out for his daughter. I failed him initially, but I'm keeping that promise now, and I'll keep it every day for the rest of my life. Sophie belongs with people who love her. She belongs safe. She belongs home. Judge Patterson nodded slowly. Ms. Brooks, what's the status of Mr. Stone's foster care certification? Karen stood, tablet in hand. Background check completed and approved, Your Honor. Home study completed and approved. All documentation is in order. I'm recommending immediate placement with Mr. Stone pending formal adoption proceedings. Patterson turned back to Margaret Thorne. Counselor, do you have any evidence, actual evidence, not speculation, that would suggest Mr. Stone is unfit to care for Sophie? Margaret consulted with Harrison in urgent whispers, then faced the judge with the expression of someone playing a losing hand. Your Honor, my client's father would like to petition for custody. He's family, financially secure, and had no knowledge of any alleged misconduct. Detective Chen was on her feet immediately. Your Honor, Harrison Blackwood has been in contact with his daughter daily since her arrest. Phone records show he coordinated with attorneys before Victoria was even processed. He's attempted to use political influence to have evidence suppressed. He knew exactly what his daughter was doing and chose to protect her rather than the children she victimized. Harrison stood, face flushed with rage or shame or both. That's slander. I had no knowledge. Judge Patterson's gavel came down like a gunshot. Mr. Blackwood, sit down and be quiet, or I'll have you removed from my courtroom. Harrison sat, but the fury radiating off him was palpable. Marcus could feel it from across the room, could recognize it as the rage of a powerful man discovering his power had limits. The judge addressed the courtroom at large, voice carrying to every corner. I've seen a lot in 40 years on this bench. I've seen good people make mistakes and bad people manipulate systems. I've seen children failed by everyone who should have protected them. But I have never seen a case quite like this. Systematic, calculated evil hiding behind suburban normalcy. He looked directly at Victoria. Mrs. Blackwood, based on the evidence before me, I am terminating your parental rights immediately and permanently. You are unfit to care for any child now or ever. Victoria's head snapped up, the mask finally shattering completely. She lunged to her feet, handcuffs rattling, voice raw with venom. He was weak. Carlos was weak. He cared more about that brat than about me. Always talking about Sophie, always planning for Sophie. What about what I wanted? Her lawyers were trying to restrain her, to shut her up, but careful pretense had broken, and the truth was pouring out like poison from a lanced wound. He deserved what happened, leaving me stuck with his bratty daughter while he got to be the hero. Well, I showed him. I showed all of them, and I would have taken care of Sophie too if these bikers hadn't. The bailiffs were moving, but Victoria wasn't done, turning her fury on Marcus with wild eyes. You destroyed everything. You took my life. I hope you're happy. Marcus stood, Jake beside him, every rider in the courtroom on their feet. His voice cut through Victoria's screaming, calm and absolute. I am happy. I'm happy Sophie's alive. I'm happy you're going to prison. I'm happy Carlos's daughter will never have to be afraid of you again. So yeah, Victoria, I'm real happy. The courtroom erupted in applause before Patterson could restore order. Victoria was still screaming as bailiffs dragged her out, her composed mask destroyed, the predator finally visible to everyone. Judge Patterson waited for silence, then delivered his final ruling. Mr. Marcus Stone, I hereby grant you immediate and permanent custody of Sophie Rivera with full authority to proceed with adoption. Ms. Brooks will coordinate the placement this afternoon. He paused, looking directly at Marcus. Mr. Stone, I've been doing this job long enough to recognize genuine commitment. You saved that little girl's life. Don't make me regret trusting you with it. Marcus felt the weight of it settle on his shoulders, responsibility and promise, and the chance to finally keep his word. I won't, Your Honor. That's a guarantee. Outside the courthouse, the media scrum was waiting, cameras and microphones and reporters shouting questions. Marcus ignored them, Jake and the others forming a protective cordon as they moved toward the bikes. But Karen was waiting at the bottom of the steps, Sophie beside her. The little girl wore clean clothes Sarah had sent over, her hair brushed back from her face, bandages hidden under long sleeves. When she saw Marcus, her whole face transformed. She ran, the way children run toward safety, and Marcus knelt to catch her, mindful of her healing ribs, letting her crash into him with all the desperate trust of someone who'd finally found solid ground. Her voice was muffled against his shoulder. Did I hear right? I get to stay with you? Really? Marcus held her carefully, aware of the cameras recording every moment, not caring. Really, you're home now, Sophie. For good. She pulled back to look at his face, checking for lies the way abused children learn to check. What about Victoria? What about her dad? Victoria is going to prison for the rest of her life. Her dad can't hurt you. Nobody can hurt you anymore. I promise. Sophie studied him for another moment, then nodded, that small gesture of trust worth more than any medal Marcus had ever earned. Okay, I believe you. The ride to Marcus's house took 20 minutes through Phoenix streets, Sarah following in her car, Emma bouncing in the passenger seat with barely contained excitement. The lavender bedroom was ready, the toys arranged, the home suddenly complete in a way it hadn't been since Emma grew too old for dolls and coloring books. Sophie stood in the doorway of her new room, taking in the soft purple walls and stuffed animals and the desk covered with art supplies. Her voice came out small, disbelieving. This is really mine? All of it? Sarah knelt beside her, teacher's instinct making her movements gentle and predictable. All yours, sweetheart. And if you want to change anything, paint color, decorations, anything, we'll do that. This is your room in your house with your family. The word family made Sophie's lower lip tremble. She looked up at Marcus, at Sarah, at Emma hovering in the hallway. I've never had a real family before. Not since Daddy died. Emma stepped forward, 17 and fierce, and refusing to let anyone in her family feel alone. Well, you've got one now. I've got a little sister, and you've got a big sister, and we're going to be ridiculously annoying together. It's going to be great. Sophie's laugh was small and surprised, like she'd forgotten that sound existed. She clutched the teddy bear Ghost had given her at the courthouse, the one wearing a tiny leather vest, and for the first time since Carlos's funeral, she looked like a child instead of a survivor. That night, after Sophie had been fed and bathed and tucked into her new bed with more gentleness than she'd known in years, Marcus stood in the doorway watching her drift toward sleep. She'd asked him to stay, to keep watch, to prove that this safety was real and lasting. Sarah appeared beside him, sliding her hand into his. They'd been married 22 years, long enough to communicate in glances and silence. She squeezed his hand once, approval and pride and shared commitment flowing through that simple contact. 1 month later, the adoption finalization felt like a formality after everything that had come before. Judge Patterson smiled, actually smiled, as Sophie approached the bench, wearing the purple dress Sarah had helped her pick out, hair in braids Emma had spent an hour perfecting. Sophie Rivera, do you wish to become Sophie Rivera Stone? Her voice rang clear and certain. Yes, sir. Mr. and Mrs. Stone, do you accept full responsibility for this child, to love and protect and raise her as your own daughter? Marcus and Sarah answered together, voices overlapping. We do. Patterson's gavel came down gently, the sound of doors closing on old nightmares and opening on new possibilities. Then by the authority vested in me, I hereby approve this adoption. Sophie, you are now Sophie Rivera Stone. Congratulations to you all. The courtroom, packed with Iron Brotherhood riders, their families, neighbors, people who'd followed the case and wanted to witness something good emerging from horror, erupted in applause. Sophie turned to Marcus and Sarah, small face radiant. I have a family again, a real family. Marcus knelt, meeting her at eye level. You never stopped having family, kiddo. Your dad loved you, and now you've got us too, forever. The celebration spilled onto the courthouse steps, 100 people witnessing Sophie Rivera Stone taking her first breath as a legally protected child in a home that would never raise a hand against her. Emma swept her new sister into a careful hug, already planning adventures and mischief, already integrating Sophie into the fabric of their lives. Detective Chen appeared through the crowd, off-duty but present because some cases mattered more than others. She pulled Marcus aside, voice low enough for privacy. Victoria's federal trial is scheduled for next month. She's facing 4 counts of first-degree murder, conspiracy, fraud. The other 13 women are taking plea deals, testifying against each other. But Victoria's fighting it. Her father hired a dream team, arguing mental illness, diminished capacity, everything they can think of. Marcus watched Sophie laughing with Emma, already looking healthier after a month of regular meals and safety. Will she win? Chen's smile was sharp, predatory in its own way. Not a chance. We've got 17 child victims willing to testify. We've got computer forensics showing years of planning. We've got financial records, witness statements, physical evidence. Your helmet camera footage alone would be enough to convict her. But we're building a case so airtight that no jury in America would let her walk. She paused, then added, Emma Rodriguez is testifying, so is Justin Porter. So are 9 other kids who survived this network. Sophie won't have to testify if you don't want her to. We have enough without her. Marcus looked at Detective Chen, understanding what she was really asking. That her choice? She's 7 years old. She shouldn't have to choose. She also shouldn't have spent years being tortured. But she did, and she survived. So if Sophie wants to tell her story, wants to make sure Victoria never hurts anyone else, then I'll support that. But it's her choice. Nobody forces her to do anything ever again. Chen nodded, respect clear in her expression. Carlos chose well when he trusted you with her. The words settled over Marcus like a blessing. Carlos's approval reaching across death and distance. He'd kept his promise. Finally, completely, he'd kept his word. That afternoon, Marcus drove Sophie to the National Cemetery where Carlos rested under white stone and endless Arizona sky. She'd asked to visit, said she needed to tell her father she was safe now, that someone had kept their promise. They walked between rows of markers, each one representing someone who'd served, someone who'd believed enough in something to risk everything. Carlos's stone was simple, regulation military issue. Nothing to distinguish it from thousands of others except the name carved deep. Staff Sergeant Carlos M. Rivera, United States Marine Corps, 1980 to 2022. Beloved father, hero, brother. Sophie knelt, placing flowers, purple and white, her favorite colors. Her voice was quiet but steady, the way children spoke to people they trusted absolutely. Hi, Daddy, it's me, Sophie. I'm living with Uncle Reaper now, and Aunt Sarah, and my sister Emma. They're really nice. Uncle Reaper tells me stories about you every night before bed, about how brave you were and how much you loved me. Tears tracked down her cheeks, but she didn't stop, needed to get it all out. I'm sorry I couldn't stop Victoria from hurting you. I'm sorry I couldn't help. But Uncle Reaper says you knew, that you tried to warn him, that you made sure someone would save me even if you couldn't. Marcus knelt beside her, his own vision blurring. He placed one hand on Carlos's headstone, cold marble under his palm, and spoke to his brother for the first time since the funeral. Carlos, I failed you initially, let you down, let Sophie down, but I kept it when it counted. Sophie's safe now. Victoria's going to prison, and I'm going to spend the rest of my life making sure your daughter knows she's loved. That's a guarantee, brother. That's my word. Sophie leaned against Marcus's shoulder, both of them crying, both of them healing. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the cemetery, turning the white stones gold, and Marcus could almost feel Carlos's presence. Not haunting, just present, bearing witness to promises finally kept. Sophie's voice was very small when she finally spoke again. Uncle Reaper, is it okay if sometimes I call you Dad? I know you're not my real dad, but Daddy would want me to have a dad who keeps his promises. Marcus pulled her close, careful of her healing ribs, overwhelmed by the weight and gift of that question. Sophie, your dad, Carlos, will always be your dad. Nothing changes that. But if you want to call me Dad too, if you want that, That would be the greatest honor of my life. She nodded against his chest, then looked up at him with eyes that were starting to believe in safety again. Okay, thanks, Dad. 8 years blurred past in the way time does when life fills with meaning. Sophie grew tall and strong, captain of her soccer team, straight-A student, fierce defender of anyone weaker. She kept Carlos's photograph on her nightstand, kept his memory alive through stories Marcus told and retold until they became family mythology, the father who'd loved her enough to make sure she'd be saved even after he was gone. The Carlos Rivera Foundation, Marcus had insisted on the name, refusing to let his brother's sacrifice be forgotten, grew from concept to reality. Office space donated by a businessman who'd lost his own child to abuse, staffed by volunteers who understood that protecting military families meant more than sending care packages overseas. Marcus and Jake ran it together, splitting time between construction work and advocacy. They lobbied for better CPS funding, trained social workers to recognize abuse patterns in military families, created support networks for children transitioning from abusive homes to adoptive families. They saved 17 kids the first year, 37 the next, numbers climbing as word spread and funding increased. Sophie volunteered after school, 15 years old and already planning a career in social work. She spoke at fundraisers, her story powerful because it was true, because she stood as living proof that intervention worked, that promises kept could save lives. Marcus stood at the back of the conference room, watching his daughter address a crowd of 300, her voice steady and sure. My name is Sophie Rivera Stone. When I was 7, my stepmother hurt me every day. But one day a man kept a promise to my father. He saved my life. And that's what this foundation does. We keep promises to protect kids when nobody else will. The standing ovation lasted 5 minutes. Emma stood beside Marcus, 23 now and in medical school, still fiercely protective of her little sister. Sarah had tears streaming down her face, pride and love mingling with the bittersweet knowledge that Sophie should never have needed saving in the first place. But she had needed it, and they'd been there, and that mattered. Afterward, walking to their cars through the Phoenix night, Sophie slipped her hand in Marcus's the way she'd done at 7, at 10, at 13, a gesture of trust that never got old. Dad, thank you for everything. Marcus squeezed gently, years of promises and failures and redemptions compressed into that simple contact. Thank you for trusting me, kiddo, for believing I'd keep my word. She looked up at him, 15 and strong and whole in ways that had seemed impossible 8 years ago. Daddy told me you would. In the letter he left me before he died, he said if anything happened, Uncle Reaper would save me. And you did. The final piece clicked into place. Carlos had known, had prepared, had trusted Marcus to overcome his own failures and fear when it mattered most. The promise hadn't been a burden. It had been a gift, the chance to honor a brother by protecting what he'd loved most. Sunday afternoon, and Marcus sat on his Harley at a stoplight, Sophie behind him in her own vest. Iron Brotherhood honorary member, earned through survival and courage. Behind them, 43 bikes rumbled. The Brotherhood grown larger over the years, but the core unchanged. Brothers who'd surveyed, who understood that promises mattered more than comfort. Sophie's voice carried through the helmet intercom, young and bright. Dad? Where are we going? Marcus smiled, watching the light change from red to amber to green. Nowhere special, just riding. Isn't that enough? Her laughter filled his ears, pure and unshadowed, the sound Carlos had died trying to protect. Yeah, that's perfect. They rode through Phoenix streets, past the courthouse where justice had finally been served, past the cemetery where Carlos rested, past the house that had once held horror and now sat empty, eventually demolished to make room for something better. They rode into desert sunset, into the promise of tomorrow, into the future Carlos had trusted Marcus to secure. The voiceover that had carried the story from beginning to end returned one final time. Marcus's own voice aged by years and wisdom, looking back on the day everything changed. They say a man's life can change in a heartbeat. I learned that in Fallujah when Carlos took shrapnel meant for me. Learned it again when I heard his daughter scream and finally kept my promise to save her. People ask if I'm a hero. I'm not. I'm just a man who owed a debt to his brother and found a way to pay it. but I'll spend the rest of my life trying to live up to what Carlos believed I could be. Because that's what brotherhood means. That's what promises mean. That's what love means. A man is only as good as his word. Carlos taught me that, and I'll teach it to Sophie. Because some promises, some bonds are stronger than death, and those are the ones worth keeping. Always. The sun set over the Arizona desert, painting the sky in shades of purple and gold. 44 riders disappeared into the distance, a family bound by choice rather than blood, by promises kept rather than obligations inherited. Sophie's laughter rode the wind, and somewhere, Marcus believed, Carlos was finally at peace. The promise was kept, the debt was paid, and love, the kind worth fighting for, had won.